Hello everybody, I'm Richard Gerver. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Rising Strong Reconnecting Schools events. This is our third and final event, and I have to say it's a very, very special event to be going out with. So to any of you that have joined us for the previous two, thank you. For those of you that have only joined us today, don't worry, we won't take it personally. I know we've got an extraordinary lineup today, and headlining for us is Professor Barry Carpenter, who I think more than ever what he has to say and what is doing has never been more relevant to any of us. And I know that Sharon is going to formally welcome Barry in a moment, but I just want to start by saying this. I don't think anyone here or anyone in the world has not been touched in some way by COVID and the events of the last 2.5 months. And I know it's one of the reasons why we're coming together to reflect on this and think about strategically how we make sure that for our children, our staff and our communities, we do everything in our power to make the transition back into a wider opening of our schools as positive an experience as it possibly can be. And with that in mind, I have to thank Barry profusely for being here today, because we know, without going into detail, that he's been touched by this very recently. And so being here for us, I think, shows us all just how much this matters to him. So thank you, Barry, very, very much indeed. So just a very quick intro, and then we're going to get straight on with the stuff that really matters. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm a former primary school teacher and head teacher. And for the last 13 years, I've been knocking about, talking and writing about education and leadership and human potential. Sharon, my co-host, my Holly to my Phil, is actually, she's responsible for this, but is far too modest to ever admit it. We were talking, well, gosh, nearly 2 months ago now, I reckon, about this and about the issue around emotional reconnection with our school communities. And Sharon came up with the idea of hosting these events. And we've had, as I said, this is the third. We had the wonderful Tristan William, who's joined us today. Last week, we had the extraordinarily inspirational Richard McCann. And today, of course, Barry. And without further ado, I am going to hand over to Sharon. But before I do, can I ask you, please, if you have any questions, if you'd like to type them into the chat box, I'll try and record as many as I can so that at the end of the session, we can ask those questions to Barry, to Matt Crawford, and to Sarah Armitage, who are also joining us today from the Embark Federation. And bear with us, we'll see how it goes. And now it's over to the far better, far wiser Sharon Gray to take over the reins. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I know many people that have joined us today. Welcome, everybody. But for those that are joining us for the first time, it's great to have you with us for our session today. My name's Sharon Gray. I was a head teacher for almost 20 years. My leadership spanned across special schools, supporting youngsters experiencing severe social, emotional, mental health, and then a large mainstream school. And I've learned hugely from the amazing children and adults that I've had the privilege to work alongside, and also met some of the most incredibly inspirational people, of which we've introduced and shared their experiences on our 2 webinars. And today we have 3 colleagues who I absolutely admire, respect, and have learned hugely from, that are going to share their experiences. So we've got, I'll just talk you through the structure of the session. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Matt Crawford, the trust leader of the Embark Federation, and then the chair of trustees, Sarah Armitage. And so they can introduce a little bit about themselves and indeed talk to you about their federation. And before we then move on to Barry Carpenter, Professor Barry Carpenter, who will share a little bit about the amazing work that he's facilitating around the recovery curriculum. We'll then go on to some of the more strategic work that myself, Matt and Sarah have been co-creating with the awesome team that is the Embark Federation before we then come together for questions facilitated by Richard. So just to reiterate, if you do have any questions, comments, anything, please do share on the chat facility, and we'll come back to visit as many of those as we possibly can. So with no further ado, first of all, I'm going to introduce Matt Crawford and Sarah Armitage. Matt, if you could tell us a little bit about your role and indeed the Embark Federation before handing over to Sarah, that would be fantastic. Over to you, Matt.
Will do, Sharon. Thank you. And I'll just say that we've been really blessed to kind of, I've known Sharon and Richard for a number of years now, and it's always been a pleasure to work with them. But none more so than during this time. It's been a real privilege. So huge thank you to you both for that. And I'm very much looking forward to listen to Barry and to meet Barry virtually during this session. So my name's Matt Crawford. I'm Trust Leader of Embark Federation. I've been teaching for 22 years now, which is kind of quite frightening, makes me feel old. But I still don't remember some of the programs that Richard was talking about earlier on. So I'm not that old at least. So that's a good thing. And I've known Sarah since 2011 when I had my first headship at Smalley. And Sarah was Chair of Governors there, so that's how we met, and I'm sure she'll talk about that in a little while. And I was lucky enough and privileged really to become a National Leader of Education in 2015, and really enjoyed that system leadership work and working with other schools, and I think that's been fabulous over the last 5 years. And then Embark Federation was formed in 2019, and it's been a real privilege, and just I'm so proud to be trust leader of the organisation. The work that we talk about as we go through the session, no one could be prouder than me of the staff team and the work they put in, and I know we'll be able to explore that as we go further on. So in terms of Embark Federation itself, it was formed out of it was a two-school federation under local authority control. And whilst we were working as the federation, a number of schools asked to join us, and we then became a multi-family trust. We like to kind of use the terminology education charitable trust, because I think that probably better describes us as an organisation. And we started off with 7 schools in 2019. We're working with 9 schools currently, which is about to become 12. And they're schools right across Derbyshire. We serve 3,000 pupils in their communities. We operate under 4 core beliefs: family, integrity, teamwork and success. And they're absolutely crucial. They're pivotal to everything we do. And I think you'll see them coming out of this piece of work that we've been doing alongside Sharon. And our vision is quite a simple one, really. It is to create schools that stand out at the heart of the community. And we've particularly chosen stand out rather than outstanding, because I think outstanding has those Ofsted connotations. And we're certainly not doing things for Ofsted. We want to stand out for everything that we do, and kind of for our schools to be at the heart of the communities, which is very important to us. So I think that's plenty for me. I'm going to hand over to the lovely Sarah Armitage, who is our Chair of Trustees, and like I say, I've been privileged to work with since 2011.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Richard, for letting us be part of your finale, Rising Strong finale. It's great to be here and amazing to see so many people taking part. So just briefly, as Matt said, we met in 2011. I actually chaired the selection panel where we chose Matt as the head teacher at Smalley, so that was a big responsibility. And then fairly early into Matt's headship, he introduced us to Sharon. So Sharon, your sister came to the school and you led us through a shared vision exercise involving all of our school community. And it was phenomenal, absolutely. It'll always stay in my memory as a really, really key point in our journey. So I thank you for that. And it's so amazing to have you back and working with us. So my role as Chair of Trustees, I'm learning massively on the steepest learning curve ever, because we only began last year, and governance within a trust is hugely different to governance within a maintained school. So I've been on my own learning journey, So now I've got a board of trustees, some incredible people that have been very connected to this plan, and an amazing group of local chairs. And I know at least one of them is on this call today who has contributed hugely. So within the governance team, it's a big team effort as well. And we've been very much part of and connected to the recovery plan. So that's me.
Lovely, and thank you so much, Sarah. And so we'll hear a little bit more about how the Federation has sort of really tackled this issue in the collaboration and a collaborative approach in a few minutes. But what I'm going to just check with Professor Barry Carpenter. You're now host, Barry, so you will be able to share your slides. If you just want to check that you can do that whilst I'm introducing you, if that's okay, please. And so I'm in awe of this gentleman, an incredible character. And I know that some of you have already mentioned in the chat that you've met him, you've worked alongside him, and you too have been touched incredibly by all the work that he's done. Barry was actually going to be retiring this year. I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit about
30 days time.
In 30 days time, but he's not anyway. But maybe one day soon. What can we say? He was recently appointed to the UK's first professorship in mental health and education at Oxford Brookes University, an honorary professor at universities in Ireland, Germany, Australia, a fellow of the University of Oxford, awarded a CBE, an OBE by the Queen, entered into Who's Who in acknowledgement of his national and international contribution to the field of special education. An absolute intellectual wizard, but also a real gentleman with such humanity, kindness and generosity and warmth, who just ignites and exudes and shares his energy to create just a legacy of making such a positive difference. So Barry, we are so honoured to have you with us today, and we really appreciate you giving us your time. Are you able to share your slides?
Well, I've been operating actually, Sharon, from two laptops, and it seems the slides are on the other laptop, not this one. So I'm actually trying to get in on the other laptop. So Matt, if you see a request for me to join, it's because I'm trying to get in.
So Matt, if you're able, although
I think at the minute Barry is host, so you'd have to let yourself in. I think
that could be a novel experience. Maybe.
yourself in or not.
Let me just see if I can get in another way.
It seems that I'm getting notes that your screen has started to share, and I'm hoping that other people have too.
Okay.
And whilst Barry is doing that, so what we will then go on to do after Barry has almost talked through the recovery curriculum, which I'm hoping you may have had the opportunity to read through his think piece that we shared as part of the signing up for our event today, but if not, it's on his website. We are then going to show the journey of the Embark Federation and the way in which Matt and Sarah have led a whole collaboration, an entire whole community of families working together to co-create the way forward, the pathway that we will be walking. So Barry, I'm just going to ask, how's it going with screen?
No, can you control it? Can one of you control it from your end, and I'll talk to it?
Barry, if you go into your picture and you'll see 3 little dots on the right hand side,
yeah,
click on those.
Yeah, got it.
And if you make me the host, please.
Or I think you might have to click on Sharon's picture and the dots on,
okay.
on the
yeah,
right.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sharon's picture.
Okay.
And then
make host. Okay, I've made you host.
Fantastic. And anybody that knows me knows that. Right. Barry, can you go back onto my picture, please? Sorry, guys. Yep. And if you can just click on the 3 dots again.
Yep.
And does it say make me host again?
No, there's something else came up, and I clicked on that to make you host, so it should have come over to you.
Aha, and you've done it beautifully, and so
Okay,
I think
right.
we are absolutely with it. So, Barry, tell me what to do and when to click. Over
Okay,
to
I
you.
will do. So thank you for those kind words of introduction, Sharon. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really quite exciting for me because Matt and Sharon have shared with me their various documents. And what was amazing was the level of response to the ethos that's embodied in the recovery curriculum, which actually isn't a written curriculum. It is just an articulation of thinking, and it was called a think piece, about how we should be supporting and receiving our children when they return to school, what their needs might be. And it's an encapsulation of what will have happened for children in recent weeks. It came from conversations with my son, Matthew, who is the co-author of this paper and who is principal of Baxter College, an 11 to 16 high school in Kidderminster, also an academy trust school. And he pushed me to do this because I thought I'd given up writing because retirement was looming. Well, that seems to have gone into the mists somewhere. So Sharon mentioned you've hopefully had access to the think piece to read it. And if you haven't read it now, you may want to read it by way of follow-up, because obviously these series of slides are very brief. They will just highlight key points. If you want to go deeper, you'll probably need to read the think piece, but that's only 4 pages long. But there are a lot of podcasts going to be appearing in the coming weeks. In fact, there will be 12 podcasts in all, and Sharon will be recording one of those next week for us. And they will be almost a box set, as someone said, of ideas and thinking around the recovery curriculum, because we do need to think about what has life been for our children in the last 3 months, since that day when we turned around and said to them, school's closed, off you go. For some of our youngest children, they will have felt abandoned. Why can't I go to school anymore? Does my teacher like me anymore? And so you'll see from this slide that's just come up, you can go to the recovery curriculum, and there are lots of additional resources to support some of the issues I raise. We've tried to make sure that anything I mention, you will have the opportunity to track it through. And if you can't find that, please send questions in, and I'm happy to give Matt and Sharon the relevant links. But in the main, everything should be on the recovery curriculum. I've also provided Sharon with something I call useful websites. So if I mention something coincidentally that's not at the core and heart of my presentation this afternoon, for example, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, which I've spent a lot of time looking at and how we teach those children, then I've given you some web links to that. And on my own website, which you'll have at the end of this presentation, there are loads of articles that go back over my career and lots of other information. I've been collecting storybooks, for example, that deal with the coronavirus, that are pitched at a whole range of age groups. Because one of the things children will want from you when they come back is, okay, now explain to me what's just happened. Why didn't I come to school anymore? My son had a student parliament meeting the other week, virtually, obviously. And he asked them, what do you want from us when you return? And they all said, we want somebody to give us a scientific explanation of what this coronavirus is and what's been happening. So we may think, let's move away from it. The children have had enough of this. But actually, this has been very significant in their lives, and they will want answers from you. The next slide, Sharon, please. So in the paper, we articulate 5 losses: a loss of routine, a loss of structure, a loss of friendship, a loss of opportunity, and a loss of freedom. Children lost their daily routines, the rushing to get the school bag ready, setting off for school. They lost the structure, just that daily timetable. Lots of our children enjoy that structure, don't we? It gives us a focus for what's happening minute by minute, hour by hour during the day. And what about that loss of friendship? I had a decorator working on the outside of the house last week, and he was talking about his 9-year-old boy who said to him, Dad, I understand about the virus. I know I can't go to school, but I wish I could see my friends. I just want to see their faces. He wanted nothing more but just to see their faces. And for some children, this lack of friendship, even for our most recalcitrant adolescents who you think don't want conversations, their peer group is all to them in those teenage years. It's the way they calibrate their self-esteem, their self-confidence. It's how they form their self-image. The brain in those teenage years is going through its second most rapid growth since the first years of life. The structures of the brain are malleable, very malleable, being formed. They need to have constant positive reinforcement in order for those brain structures to be constructive and helpful to future learning. It's the brain preparing itself for the responsibilities of adulthood. And that loss of opportunity, one student that I interviewed when preparing the recovery curriculum paper said to me, she was an A-level student, they told me I was preparing to run a marathon. Now they tell me there's not even a race. And she felt this huge sense of loss. We may all think, oh, lucky year group, they've not got the formal examinations. But many pin their hopes on those examinations. They want to know that they have got the grades that will give them those life opportunities. And until those grades come out in August, those children need that reinforcement. You may think, oh, well, year 13, year 11, they've gone. We don't need to be kind of directly responsible for them. I'm not sure. I think many of them will be quaking in their boots at the moment. And there is a loss of freedom. Just this whole lockdown, how uncool is it to be with your parents for 24/7? How uncool is to have your mom and your dad as your teacher every day? And if you listen to the Cambridges, I mean, they didn't even tell their children when it was Easter. They've even been taught through those periods. I'm sure they're not telling their children it's half term either. And so, you know, we need to think about that loss of freedom. I know of children already who are so in lockdown mentality that in fact they are dreading having to come out of the house and garden again. So if we go to the next slide, there are 4 consequences to this loss. It was interesting, even the Archbishop of Canterbury the other weekend actually said loss and bereavement and anxiety are all traumas. They are all traumas. And if you look at this list, some of that will appear in every single one of your children. There cannot be a child who walks out of this situation scot-free. All will have some unresolved issues. And if we don't meet those issues head on, then in fact we're going to be into real problems. We know that there are schools, educationalists who are articulating the catch-up brigade. Get them back in, get them back onto page 76, which is the page they left, and they'll go for it. Later this afternoon, I'm actually doing a seminar for the University of South Florida, who've also picked up on the recovery curriculum. And they tried to invite their education administrators to join us later this afternoon. And the response from the State Education Department was, oh no, children will come back on an accelerated curriculum. That sounds even worse than the catch-up brigade in this country. Moving on. I just want to pick up on attachment, because I think in the last 2 years, when I've been speaking about complex needs, which many of you know has been my main area of research and practice. I mean, the bulk of my career has been as a head teacher 3 times over. I've only latterly become, if you like, anything of a pure academic. And even then, my research is all school-based. I think we just need to visit why attachment is important. That if we don't help some of our children resolve the issues they may return to, then they will pay a high price for these lockdown months. Children who are securely attached will be better problem solvers, achieve more academically, what do we all want, but be more self-aware, be more able to self-regulate. I think those 2 lists in themselves are reason enough to think we have to address attachment issues as they may appear. and think more about trauma-informed approaches. The next one. I want to touch on anxiety. Very interestingly, last week, the Royal College of Psychiatrists published a report. Now, nothing in the current environment, colleagues, can be deep, sound research. We do not have the experience. We do not know enough about the current context, which continues to unravel in front of our eyes. So everything is kind of best judgment stuff. My writing about the recovery curriculum was best judgment, informed by what I know about trauma, attachment, etc. So it's applied, it's transitional research, but it's not purist, focused on the here and now. We know, though, that anxiety is a key block to learning. What's going on in the brain of the anxious child? Well, the cortisol levels, and a bit of cortisol is good for all of us, but if the cortisol level continues to rise and rise, and it hits the surface of the brain, it will actually block the part of the brain that deals with memory imprint. So you may have a child sitting at the back of your class who is quiet, they don't interrupt you, they don't really contribute to the lesson, they're no trouble, and because you've got other children to manage, whether it be 15 or whether it be 30, you don't really intervene very much with them. If I then ask that child afterwards, what was that lesson Miss Gray just taught? And they might just say to me, I don't know. They're not being rude, but nothing imprinted. The anxious child, if we go to the next slide, Sharon, the anxious child is not a learning child. And the Royal College of Psychiatrists articulated last week, lockdown anxiety. And I think, because you're not going to have time to do individual probes, at most you're going to have contact with some children just for a few days before the academic year ends. But let's not wash away September, because we'll have to deal with some of this stuff in September and well beyond, to be honest. I think it's best to work from the stance that all children will return with some degree of anxiety, with unanswered questions. We are their educators. We must step up and accept that professional responsibility. So to summarize this first part, the recovery curriculum, it's a construct. I did toy with the word concept, but my son and I decided we'd go for the word construct because it's part of construction. What I love about Embark Academy and the documents, academies and the documents it's produced, is it's gone about that process of construction. And it's built them based on compassionate leadership. And that can be at all levels in the organization. It's gone back and it's looked at its aims and values, not written new aims and values, but rather those aims and values that need to inform curriculum at the point a child returns to school. That child will stand in front of us, whether it be on June the 1st, whether it be on June the 12th for secondaries, whether it be not until September for some, and maybe even then beyond. We still do not know. But on the day that child stands before you as their teacher, the question you must ask yourself is, how do I touch this child at their point of learning need? And that learning need may be self-evident, it may not. But it's your aims and values in your school that should inform your best judgments. That's all we can do, guys, is best judgments. And this has to be a personalized response. And what I love about the work that you've done in your educational charity trust, Matt, if I use that phrase, is that personalized response. You've made it very obvious that this embraces your group of learners, and embracing that group of learners, you will hopefully touch the individual needs that will be peppered throughout the schools in your group. Next one. There are 5 levers, and I must say these are my son's work, so these very much are rooted in pedagogy. What is the pedagogy? What is the process of teaching and learning that we should be put in place? And relationships comes first. Reach out, greet them. Don't expect them to joyfully return. Can you imagine some of the little ones at the moment, the 5 and 6-year-olds, who are going back to school next week, if their parents are going to? They're thinking of that wonderful, exciting classroom that they left with all their friends around. And then my youngest grandson, Bertie, is expecting to go back next week. And he's expecting Jackson to be in the 15 that'll be in his group. What if Jackson's in the other group? What if Jackson's break times and play times are different to his? He's going to be heartbroken. He's waited for weeks to be reconnected with Jackson, and it may not happen. And then your schools are going to be full of hatched sticky tape across tables, down corridors, in all sorts of places, to block, to stop, to prevent participation and access in what was once a free and exciting environment. If your children aren't traumatized when they come back through the door next week, you'll traumatize them within 24 hours. That environment will confront their memory of their beloved school. So we need to create and recreate our community. We need to say the things you've said before, but say them you must. Engage, listen, understand, grow together. Grow together as a community of human beings of whatever age, whatever stage in life, whatever job title you may have, from trust leader down to cleaner, and from student to child. You have all experienced the pandemic. We are all scarred to some degree. So we look for that scaffolding of the teaching experiences, that being responsive. You know, we can do differentiation till the cows come home. Don't plan it. Just go for the differentiation on the hoof approach. It's often the best differentiation. You know your resources, you know your children. Just wrap it around them as you go. Make it a transparent curriculum. Please don't impose stuff. If they want to spend the whole day talking about the scientific rationale of a coronavirus, sorry, but you've got to go with it. We need that co-construction, co-creation, co-production of curriculum. That's what we mean by transparent curriculum. And we need space. They will need to be given space to explore their environment, this new environment, to rediscover themselves. Who are they? We never realized you, teacher, had such control over our lives. You, teacher, can shut down our school and send us home for 3 months to be taught by our parents. Are you sane? Yeah, they're going to have all sorts of questions. They may have had a really good relationship with you before they left school. Don't assume they're going to come back with that same rosy glow about their relationship with you. Next slide. So this is about holistic recovery. I think for every single child, no exceptions, we need to revisit the journey we've been on, revisit the rationales. That's if we can make sense of some of the political judgments, but we will do our best. There are factual things we can explain. We can do comparators with other countries and their experiences. Children will want to know answers. Why did we as a country have so many deaths when we know that our NHS has worked so hard? Some of your children will have moms and dads who are nurses and doctors. So for some children, there will perhaps need to be a more personalized approach, drill it down, more needs-led, small group work, socially distanced, of course. But for some, there needs to be deep recovery. Some will be so traumatized by this, it's going to take a much longer period. Some of you are going to think, well, who's going to do all of this? Well, my guess is that your group of schools has already sent people on the mental health leads training. You've got some staff with some training. They're going to have to step up. This is going to have to be a role for some people who've already got some degree of knowledge, even though we've hardly had any time to implement any of that. Next slide. And it's about these children may feel now disenfranchised from school as an environment, from the curriculum of the school, from you as a group of teachers, from their peer group. We need to engage them, and you'll see the website there. There is an engagement profile on that website that doesn't talk history, geography, literacy, maths. It talks about curiosity, persistence, initiation, investigation. Some of you that are in the SEND world will know of the Rochford Review, and that the P levels have gone. The P levels in part are being replaced by the engagement model. I am the original author of Engagement for Learning, and the work that the DFE has taken for the Rochford Review is based on my time as National Director at the DFE back in 2009, 2012, when I directed the Complex Needs Project and developed the pedagogy around engagement. And for me, engagement is the liberation of intrinsic motivation. Some of your children, some of your most able, brightest children will come back layered with the wretched experience they've gone through in the last 3 months. and we need to reawaken their learning and liberate that intrinsic motivation that lurks within each and every one of our children. But for some of your children, you're going to have to use what I would call the lens of engagement. Make that lens a bit like the photographer's long lens, sharpen it in, and get that child clearly in focus. And then you will find that motivation lurks deep within some of our children. Next slide.
Sorry.
We've gone there. So do check out the Engagement for Learning website. You'll find just in the last 2 weeks, a couple of colleagues and I have gone through all of the formats there, made sure that they are easily downloadable, and you'll be able to have easy access.
I'm just getting your slides back up, Barry. If there are any comments, questions, just as I get these slides back up, please do feel free to put onto the chat line. And I know that Richard will be facilitating those for us.
Well, the next slides that we're going to look at, actually, Sharon, are a series of resource slides.
Right, okay.
One of the first slides I'm going to show you is a free downloadable booklet produced by Books Beyond Words called Beating the Virus. A quick word of explanation. Some of you will think, well, this is a wordless book. Our children are very skilled readers because we have such high standards across our group of schools. Why would you want a wordless book? Let me just explain that again neuroscientifically. When a child is, thank you, Sharon, that's the one. When a child gets very anxious, the anxiety which is released and the emotional response that is released from the amygdala at the back of the brain, when it transverses the brain and gets to the frontal cortex, it can actually block the reading function. Now, if you just look at this, you can see the pictures. With any student of any age, you could create that story, co-create, co-produce, co-construct. And in so doing, let them tell their story. Do they want to tell their story in pictures? Do they want to tell their story in photographs? Do they want to tell their story in pure traditional orthography, writing? You know, there's the website, free, and there are several other books, and I'm not showing them because of time, but let me tell you, one of the other books is When Someone Dies from Coronavirus. Again, it's wordless, because how do you start those conversations? And Matt, I'm sure in your experience, you've had the awful time when that child has come who's lost a mom or a dad, and it makes you feel utterly wordless. There are no words for the pain and distress of that child. So there's a resource to go to. The next one is, again, from Nurture UK. Please have a look at this bereavement box. 60 cards in this that are just superb, produced by the magnificent Tina Ray. The resources she's produced for Nurture UK are absolutely terrific. And if we go to the next slide, one of the resources is a transition toolbox. When I came back this afternoon, I had to go out to a funeral, unfortunately, at lunchtime, or observe a hearse passing. And when I came back, a box was arriving for me. I have just bought a whole set of these boxes to give to every local primary school within stone's throw of my house, because when year 6 comes back, they can't go on school visits to secondary school. This is going to be hellish for them, because however well you manage transition to secondary, it's still a big step, isn't it? And however well we've planned it, some children fall down. This is built on nurture principles. I would beg every primary school, please get it. It's the best thing that you can do. And you can say to me, well, we're going to search around for resources. Please, how many days have you got left with those year 6? And year 7 teachers need to have this, because the transition process needs to continue in a way you wouldn't normally continue it in secondary, because children will not have had time to walk around the building, get to meet their new teachers, and all those activities you do. This is absolutely superb. And for the mental health leads, Tina Ray's also produced this wellbeing toolkit. It came out just actually at the start of lockdown. Again, this I think is an essential resource to empower our mental health leads to do a job that none of us 12 months ago ever thought we would have to embark on. Next slide. So quite simply, how do we keep our children and young people emotionally strong? That should be our goal, our quest, our journey in the coming weeks. And I've deliberately used a physical education picture here. Let let's not forget exercise. When any of our children get distressed, stressed, anxious in classroom, sometimes that simple walk around the grounds, around the corridor, let them go. Maybe we need to go back to short burst lessons rather than long protracted ones. I've been talking with a PE colleague because I've been asked to do a lecture for the Youth Sports Trust, and I'm not a PE specialist, so it's a bit scary. And one of the things he came up with ties in with some research I'm just finishing on attachment, where I've discovered that, and it's school-based work, so I've been working with 2 teachers every week on 3 sessions, that imitation is probably key to sorting out attachment issues with children. Very simple attachment, you know, Simon Says type stuff, or the copying, the mirroring type exercise we've all used for infill. This PE colleague suggests teach them a new sport. Don't traumatize the brain by having to go through recall. Put them into new learning, so you create new neural pathways with new learning, and make it imitation based, so they mirror, they model, etc., etc. So you don't overload the brain's capacity to learn again. But do think of exercise as intervention. Fundamentally, guys, if I had time and took you through an international literature review on mental health, it boils down to 2 things: what makes us happy and what makes us sad. And we need to know what makes us happy and use it for ourselves, self-regulation, to intervene when we're feeling sad. You know, if you've had a tough day at school, you go home, it's not acceptable to kick the dog when you go home. It's better to put the lead on the dog, take the dog for a walk. The walk is better for you and the dog. Start to think about how do we make our children happy. And one of the things that I would recommend, if we go to the next slide, are these resources from a firm called Butterfly Print. This is one way of auditing what your current mental health provision is in your school. But on the next slide, these are 4 resources across the key stage. They're emotional well-being journals. They're cheap and cheerful. They've dropped the price. They're offering free postage. You could, for those children still on home learning, you could send these home, because I bet you've not sent anything home that's to do with emotional well-being. You've sent tons of literacy and numeracy, and for those secondary pupils, more academic stuff, but we've sent nothing home. So maybe as a summer holiday activity for any child who doesn't return to school, these would help go through some of the emotional baggage that has accumulated in these recent weeks. The other thing I'd recommend, and Sharon knows where the sheet is for the happiness box, there is a rationale to make the happiness box. I've posted it on my website. I think I've sent Sharon a copy of this. When I talked earlier about engagement, how do we engage the disengaged? The happiness box, guys, is a shoebox. It's a shoebox. And the first art activity is to decorate the shoebox. Every child should have a happiness box, and it can be filled with the things that make them happy. Do you know, I've come to realize, because I've got my grandchildren making happiness boxes for themselves at the moment through Zoom teaching, and I've been observing what they put in the happiness box. Here's another example. For a secondary pupil who actually is a disengaged pupil who doesn't go to school, and this is being used to bridge her back into school by things to do with Demi Lovato. I know nothing about Demi Lovato, but if you tell her that Demi Lovato says, she'll do anything. And so I'm afraid that's the technique for getting her back into school when school reopens. But I've been watching my grandchildren put things in the happiness boxes. We can do a rough screening about the child's emotional needs by what they put in that happiness box. That year 6 boy who's perfectly well adjusted normally, who chooses to put a piece of soft cloth in that happiness box. And when you tell the child, oh, okay, guys, go and have 5 minutes for your happiness boxes, or you can see that child that's getting very anxious, you might gently touch the shoulder. No, you won't, because we're socially distancing. You might gently indicate to them that they might want to go get the happiness box. If he chooses to pull out that piece of soft cloth and puts it in his pocket so you can't see him, and he gently is rubbing it to self-soothe, that tells you a lot about that emotional state, the emotional state of that young boy that you previously thought was very well adjusted. Next slide. So, overall, can we please think about kindness? Last week, it was Mental Health Awareness Week, and the main theme for Mental Health Awareness Week was was kindness, sorry. And there is I've put the mental health research briefing on my website. We need to be kind to ourselves and to our others, because that really benefits all of our mental health. We need kindness to be at heart of a community. As the Maori say, I'm not going to try and read the Maori line. If kindness is shown, then kindness is what you shall receive. Let's show kindness and compassion at the heart of everything we do. Let's rebuild our school communities on those very sound, very necessary principles. And maybe we will create schools that are even more magnificent than they were before lockdown. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very, very much for that, Barry. And I apologise profusely for my IT tech skills that kind of messed up halfway through. But as always, you retain a steadiness and a calmness despite the adversity that you face, and you modelled that incredibly. So really lots and lots of wise words from you, Barry, which we've really, really appreciated. If you don't mind, before we have any questions, I'm just going to go straight into sort of really illustrating through the implementation of the intent of that Barry has just shared. And I'm going to talk a little bit into what the Embark Federation have done under the leadership of Sarah and Matt and their entire team. And again, I'm going to whiz through these pretty quickly. And in the background, you can hear my lovely dogs barking as they're posterized, because this kind of thing is happening to us all, a very unusual situation. But you can have these slides, so I won't read them through. But just to give a little bit of meat onto the bones of what Barry has said. So the Embark Federation, as Matt and Sarah have outlined, is in Derby, and really wanted to take their absolute intrinsic values into this approach of co-creating what their recovery into, or their reconnection into recovery and further resilience would be at a time of significant adversity, where if we're not careful, as Barry has said, we respond from a place of fight, flight, or fear. And that's the brainstem, subconscious response to a situation when we're under threat. And it means that we don't necessarily think well. So co-creating a space for thinking by standing alongside each other together was the key sort of initial part of the journey for the Embark Federation. And I think that created a space to breathe and to show up courageously with the vulnerability, knowing that there are no experts in this time. However, being willing to show up and do the best that we possibly can, acknowledging the vulnerability, is really important. And I think what shone from the very core of the Embark approach was not losing the hope and the optimism of childhood throughout this journey, and also what we could gain from our learned experience of this, and really funneling that into the future of what would be the Embark curriculum into the future, as rich in hope and humanity as it will be in knowledge, and having that real balance of an approach. Knowing we don't actually know the adversity that some of our families have gone through, but actually we do know from some of the most incredible people that have experienced adversity that with the right relational support, it can actually make us even stronger. And there's this beautiful Japanese art form that when a ceramic is broken, instead of throwing it away, when it's fragmented, put it together with molten gold, and therefore it becomes even more containing and strong. And in actual fact, the approach that we're seeing from Embark is that as a result, this whole collaborative, whole community have come together even stronger as a result of the adversity than they were before. And there's some really nice examples that I'm sure Matt and Sarah can share with you later. The other thing about the pandemic, as we understood it, is of course everybody is going through different situations, different experiences. We know there's an issue, there's a pandemic, but actually we didn't know what some of those issues potentially were for our own local communities, our individual schools within their communities, across the trust. This sort of reflection that was on Twitter about we're in the same storm, but we could well, and we are all in very, very different boats. So the trust reaching out to really identify as accurate a lived experience as possible for the children, for the families, for the staff, for everybody involved. And of course, in doing that, creating a psychologically safe space for people to be able to share that lived experience without potential stigma. It could be that one of our staff members' partners have lost their job, and so our staff members are facing significant financial difficulty. It could be some of our parents for the first time facing those kind of difficulties. We're very much aware of things like the domestic violence and all of those other issues around. There's a little... and so it's kind of getting as near to the truth so that we can identify for our individual schools and across the trust the specific issues that we will be potentially facing, and then anticipate what our folk may well need in terms of having their needs met and support on this journey towards coming back to becoming whole again as a community, as a school. So this was initially the thoughts where Matt and Sarah facilitated a whole team of 500 staff representing different groups across the trust coming together and talking through openly, honestly, with real vulnerability, but courage to share that. What is it that we're worried about? And we started to draw together those concerns and, of course, incredible ideas from those trust members, the Federation members, into what then became a plan as to how we would work together. Not a step-by-step, one thing at a time. This is a complex and complicated problem with many, many different solutions. Many people facing this and almost repeatedly doing similar activities. And so what the Federation decided to do was come together as one whole and then divide into teams, and 9 teams were established. And the team members represented from nursery, early years, into Key Stage 1, 2, 3, secondary and special schools, a whole incredible broad range of expertise and skills. And each team had a specific focus to look at. So by doing this from the outset, we were able to reduce workload for colleagues to make sure that they could manage both their own self-regulation, their own self-awareness, so they could respond from that place of self-awareness as opposed to self-defense, and be really open in their own vulnerability to move forward. So what you can see here is an overview of 9 teams. The first being how we stay connected with our entire communities during the lockdown. And some amazing ideas were shared, and colleagues on this site sharing ideas today who aren't involved in Embark, I know you too have been doing some amazing things, such as instead of the free school meal vouchers, taking food hampers to some of our more vulnerable families so that we're gifting and having that kind of connection, albeit social distance, to check out in terms of safety and safeguarding, and of course emotional connectivity, really important. So staying connected. And another example is Matt Crawford, incredible leader, has facilitated a West End show for his staff next week as just a coming together at 6 o'clock to hang out together. That emotional connection, very thoughtfully thought through and planned, has been really important to enable some of the other things that have been happening. So for example, Team 2 have been looking at the impact of stress on trauma, and looking at the biology, the neuroscience, and developing CPD for staff to be able to further resource staff to be able to manage themselves and support themselves and identify their own need as human beings who we care and love deeply in our community, so that they can then be sufficiently resourced to really be emotionally available and meet the children and the families as they start to increase in numbers and rejoin the schools. Then Team 3, you can see, set out to do an incredible piece of work about developing a whole range of questionnaires that would then inform a really detailed database. So the views of stakeholders, from children to families to staff members, in all sorts of accessible ways. Involved in the trust has been 2 special schools, some children with really complex needs, and so making sure that we hear their voices, and so that it's really accessible. And then those questionnaires feeding in directly into analysis, and that analysis, because it's a reflection of the lived experience, to then inform what Team 5 have been doing, which is about that risk assessment. So we can stand strong saying that the risk assessment for each of our individual schools has been informed by the lived experience of those that are within that community, our teachers, our families, our children's, and we can anticipate and plan for that need as they return. Vulnerability in terms of risk, in terms of need. And as we're doing that, Team 4, you can see, have been looking at the transition of reconnection for staff, purely for staff, and have some amazing plans in place in terms of what day 1 will look like for staff, and how we reconnect emotionally for staff teams to keep them strong. Staff at the heart of all of this, because the children are so important to us. And then we go into Group Team 7, which have been focused on real bereavement and loss, both short-term specific support and in the longer term. Team 8, which is really thinking about what we can draw from this to inform our future developing curriculum, which is about the hope and humanity. And Team 9 is about ongoing supervision. You'll note that I didn't mention Team 6. This has been quite a large team led by staff, support staff, teaching staff, a whole group of expertise. The team leader, Anna Upton, a primary school head teacher, has done a fabulous job of co-creating with those staff across those schools a whole range of resources which will inform potentially what the reconnection, recovery through to resilience team will look like. As part of the database to inform the risk assessment, Matt and the team have set up a shared database with all of the resources that sit alongside that. And that's just an example, each team inputting huge amounts of resources that everybody can then use. Again, we've got some examples of other teams and how they're moving through this so that we can be highly focused. We can have a library of resources to enable, no matter where the role, responsibility, accountability is, for folk to take this almost off the shelf to try lots and lots of different things to support without becoming overwhelmed with the planning. And this is what hopefully we're going to be able to share on a wider basis with other schools across the country. And I think that's incredibly generous of Sarah and Matt and their intention from the outset. So in terms of the actual curriculum offer, as it were, as Barry has said, it's going to be personalised. It's dynamic in its risk assessment, in that we will need to amend and respond in the moment to whatever may be coming our way in this storm. And so having a range of activity for our colleagues we felt would be really, really useful. And you can see in here there's a huge library, for example, of socially distanced PE sessions, outdoor learning with minimal equipment, from EYFS through to upper secondary, and for children with special educational needs as well. We also felt about activities to support not just the loss-orientated response, but also thinking about the restoration element and how we can really support our children's staff's emotional well-being in the short and long term. And so again, bringing together colleagues from across many, many different settings within the Federation, creating a whole Federation approach. So for example, the Federation is working towards co-creating a Museum of Hope and Humanity in December, possibly January, where we can come together to celebrate. And that's an end point for which we work towards, whilst children, groups of children and staff will be doing things like, at the moment, creating their COVID capsules, as it were, their experiences to share when we rejoin together, and to look at the history and the actuality of what's happened at the same time as the experience, the emotional experiences that our youngsters and their families have lived through, and aiming through a variety of creative arts, physical activity, sharing that emotional experience. We know to share the narrative, to co-create a story in itself is incredibly therapeutic. So co-creating those stories from the individual perspective, the families, schools, within the community, and then coming towards a celebration at a time when we can come together sort of physically, as it were, in the school setting, to celebrate that we've survived through this pandemic, that actually every single person did something to enable a positive outcome. Because whether it was we stayed in and didn't go or do or whatever, or we helped mum, or we walked the dog, or whatever it was, we all did something that we can celebrate. So things like the Museum of Hope and Humanity is an ongoing piece of work where we have other activities such as the Book of Hope, where children are writing poetry, children each creating a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that they can then put together with their friends, and so almost metaphorically showing how the community is growing bigger and as a result more colourful as people come back and join. 50 activities that we have an amazing team of support staff working on at the moment, really illustrating the neuroscience of how children and adults can self-regulate, can self-calm by just being aware of what's happening to them in terms of the biology of stress. So lots and lots of activities there. This is again some more as part of the Museum of Love and Hope, examples of what staff can do at each age and stage for children, very much there and accessible, and Matt is very happy to share that. And also, whilst there's lots of stuff, activities, all sorts of mechanisms of support underpinning all of this, it's not just what we do, it's how we do it. So the guiding underpinning principles for the kind of the agreed stance that the adults are going to be taking, one of compassion with each other and with the children as they come back. And the Federation thought that really important to outline that. And so we know that whilst our staff teams are not trained therapists necessarily, although we may well have therapists on our staff team, we don't necessarily need trained therapists. What we need are adults who are emotionally available and ready to sit alongside with absolute compassion and empathy and be steady and present for the children. And what I believe this trust has done through its leadership of steady, calm thought and reflection have modelled from the outset that we need steady adults to support some of our children who may not be as steady, and that's been co-created. So I really whizzed through that very, very quickly. I'm going to stop sharing with a view to coming back together for thoughts and questions that Richard will now facilitate as he's been reading and I've been talking for Barry, Matt and Sarah, if you please.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Amazing. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Sarah, particularly Professor Carpenter, for what I think has been an extraordinary, thought-provoking session. Just to let everyone know that Matt has very kindly added to the chat room his email address. So if there's any of the resources that Sharon's shown that you'd like from him, please email him. I'm going to try and work out, using my superstar technological abilities, how I can send them to everybody through Eventbrite, but please don't hold your breath. Sharon and Matt will find a way if not, but please do message Matt. I mean, just extraordinary. And I think what this illustrates to me, because I think, you know, what they've done is exceptional, but I think there's work like this going on all over the country, all over the world. And what this illustrates to me is just how an extraordinary profession you are. No one in the history of the world has ever had to deal with what you're dealing now. And to see the innovation and creativity, and most importantly, the 100% commitment to your children, your colleagues, and your communities is truly extraordinary. So I've got a few questions that I picked out, and also a couple of comments which some people might have missed as they were listening. The first is, and I really like this, somebody earlier commented that in their school, they're using the term physical distancing rather than social distancing. I think that's a huge distinction. Somebody else, and I love this, maybe it's just because we're, some of us are primary people, I love this, that the mantra that's been practiced and is going to be practiced on return is hip, hip, hooray, stay 2 meters away. I can just see that working. My primary brain is working overdrive. And on to some questions, and if anyone thinks of one while we're nattering, please put them up on the chat room. So the first one is, and I guess this is really an interesting question, for Barry, but also maybe for Matt. Is there, or are you working on any guidance on the recovery curriculum for parents? And I think this was asked because, some parents are going to come back into school with a multitude of expectations. And as we've seen in the chat boxes, for example, some parents are going to want you working on reading scores as quickly as you possibly can. So what kind of guidance might be available? Firstly, Barry, and then maybe over to Matt and Sarah.
Couple of quick answers to that one, Richard. Firstly, I've been impressed with the number of schools that have decided to share the recovery curriculum think piece with parents. And why not? Who's been doing the education for the last 3 months? So as far as I'm concerned, that think piece, the recovery curriculum, could be shared with parents. But yes, what we're doing now is, rather than write more, we're making a series of podcasts. And a podcast I recorded last week is some work that a school has been doing with parents, and parents were interviewed as part of that podcast. So there will be some more guidance, but not in written form, because this is very much about signposting a personalised journey for each and every school.
Thank you, Barry. And Matt, have you considered that at all?
Yeah, so there's definitely some resources in the folder for parents, and that would be useful for parents. And we're adding to that all the time. So, like I said, there will be some bits that it can definitely take away to work with and use with parents.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. To the next question, I want to try and get through these before we have to finish. And I think that there were a couple of people that asked this question, but in different ways. But I think at the core, it's this. How do we ensure that some of our children, particularly those with SEN, who need physical contact, who really need that physical contact, how do we ensure that those children don't see physical distancing as a rejection? Barry?
There are huge risk assessment issues there, and I think that really is a deep personalized response. I think it has to be an individual risk assessment around that child. If the only way that child could be engaged as a learner is to have some physical support, then that has to be written in. But for those members of staff, the PPE has to be thought through as well, and they need to be protected in all of this too. I was suggesting to some colleagues the other day, in a school for children where their needs are more medically based, where they're going to have to wear PPE, that can be quite intimidating for the children. Why not take a photograph of the person wearing the PPE, the teacher, the teacher's aide, and make a huge badge that you pin onto yourself. So in fact, the child does see your face because it's worn as a badge on your chest. We're going to have to be very inventive around this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next question, and I think this is a really interesting one. And I think in so many ways, it's going to be a dynamic that a number of the people who have taken time to be with us today will feel. A number of similar comments from teaching assistants, teachers, from newly qualified teachers, and even one from somebody who's about to start their teacher training in September, who are concerned that in some of their schools, they're working in a culture which is going to be very much the academic first catch-up brigade at the expense of the emotional health. What can individual members of staff do? And is there a way you could suggest they could communicate to ensure they do what they can. I wonder, Barry, if I could ask you to reflect on, you know, what individual people can do at whatever level. And then Matt, as the CEO of a trust, it's going to be hard for you because you're such an extraordinary trust. But how would you welcome members of staff coming to you as the CEO of a trust to talk about and raise these issues with you? So first to Barry and then maybe to Matt, if that's okay. And maybe Sarah as well for you to reflect on.
I ended my presentation with 2 quotes around kindness. We don't know what's coming. None of us have ever worked this situation. However much sticky tape we put down to boundary things for children, we're going to have scenarios to deal with that we've never experienced before. What's going to inform our practice? And we could get very agitated and upset very easily. And that's not a good place for us to be. And that's not good for our well-being. And I think if we can focus more on, even if it's about reminding a child to be more boundaried, it's about an act of kindness because it's keeping them safe. When we talk about attachment, often we talk about the 4 S's: seen, safe, soothed, and secure. And the safe and secure bits have suddenly become more paramount than I've ever known in using those 4 S's. So let's think about the perspective in which we deal with these things. Kindness.
Thank you, Barry. Matt and Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I will. Thank you for the question. So I think our recovery reconnect approach happens at the level of the conversation. Every conversation is that opportunity to reach out, to be there for someone, to listen, to support. And I guess as leaders, what we've done through this process is think, how do we coordinate those conversations and really encourage them? How do we model them? So next week, I'm going into one of our nursery and infant schools to talk to the staff there, offer our support, listen to their concerns. I've talked to the head teacher. That's all we can do. Every conversation is that opportunity to reach out, to listen, to care, to be kind and understand and respond. And regardless of your context, you can do that. Every conversation can count.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Matt.
Yeah, thanks. I just echo what Sarah said, really. And again, it's back to our core beliefs. And I think, you know, we very much consider ourselves as a family. And I think it's about looking after your family. You know, good families look after each other and kind of stick together. And I think that's really important. And those conversations, we've been seeking those all the way through. And a lot of this recovery program and the recovery curriculum has been very much about how we stay connected with all our stakeholders, really, during this period.
Thank you. And I'm just going to throw to Sharon for a last question reflection, I think, and then I'll wrap up if that's okay. Sharon.
Lovely, yeah. And I think what Matt was talking about is that emotional connection which is being maintained and sort of flipping the narrative almost. If we know that our children, potentially our staff, are likely to be unsteady because there's a sense of needing to survive a threat that can't be seen, they're not going, we need to kind of create a sense of safety. So if we have a child who we know already is vulnerable, then I think anticipating what their needs may well be, and for them to walk back into a classroom or into a school may well create a space that's not appropriate for them. I had a fabulous teacher I was talking to last week who is creating a little teepee right at the bottom of the school gate. So when the child walks, they're not walking into school, it's a child with significant social, emotional, mental health difficulties. And so they're going to meet them in the teepee with a little campfire and some toast. And then, because it's about how they're reconnecting through the relationship, a sense of safety, which is exactly what Sarah was saying about that interaction. And it's those interactions that we need to kind of think about, anticipate for as the adults, make sure we are as steady and as calm and as regulated as can be so that we can then support others as they come back into the school to join in regulation, as it were. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you. It leaves it to me really to say thank you, first of all, to all of you who have taken the time this afternoon to join us. A huge thank you to Matthew Crawford and Sarah Armitage from the Embark Federation, whose resources and leadership at this time, I think, have been nothing short of inspirational. To Professor Barry Carpenter for your wisdom, your humility, your sharing. It is the people that will be remembered, I think, for this time will those of us that have been trying to collaborate, to share, to work together, and to create something constructive. And I hope in the days and weeks ahead we remember that, and we spend our energy focusing on those people and not necessarily on the people that are seeking to divide us and separate us from that right now. I suppose one final thought from me before my last thank you, and it's this. As Barry so rightly said earlier on, there is no textbook for this. There is no right answer. No one knows the way, the system, the structure to guarantee 100% that we can make this right quickly for our children. But I think what I do know is that every one of you and virtually every professional I've ever come across needs to trust their instincts, because they know their community and their children better than anybody. And I would suggest that your professional judgments right now are probably the closest thing to being right as ever they have been. So thank you all so much. Please be strong, be confident, share and collaborate with one another. And just before I go, I have to thank the remarkable woman that is Sharon Gray for making all of this happen, for nagging me into getting it going with her, for providing access to some remarkable people to share with and work with. Sharon, if it wasn't for you, none of this would have happened. So listen, please, if you've got time this evening and you've got some wine in the fridge, don't waste any more time with us. Go have a glass of wine, sit in the sun, and I promise you that subconsciously, more of the answers you need will come to you. So thank you all so, so much. Take care, stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Thank you.